Live from the drama-free true crime destination. No fluff, no filler, just the bites, breakdowns, and bold truth you need. This is the Midweek Bite.
Good Wednesday evening, everybody. East Coast, West Coast, North Side, South Side, and everywhere in between to the drama-free true crime destination, Bethea'S Byte Reloaded. I'm Ernest Bethea, the last outlaw, and this is your Midweek Bite. This week, we're counting down 12 of the biggest stories to this midweek. But before we do that, I want to start with a developing story out of Florida where a man was convicted of murder and the jury recommends his punishment by death. Now, draw your attention to this story courtesy of Court TV. While that's being pulled up for you, here's what we know. A Florida jury has delivered a unanimous recommendation of death for 59-year-old DeMaurice Hunter, convicted earlier this year of the 2002 strangulation murder of his Orlando neighbor, Teresa Green. This is how deeply chaotic and sprawling this case became the moment you look past the headlines. This is a murder that's more than 20 years old, stalled by extradition delays, COVID-19 disruptions, and even a heart attack suffered by Hunter himself. Hunter is a defendant with a violent cross-country criminal history, including prior killings in California dating back to 1985 and another murder in 2005. The penalty phase was split between two worlds, with the prosecutors painting Hunter as a serial predator who squeezed the life out of his victim, while family and childhood friends pleaded for jurors to see a great person with a great heart. The victim, Teresa Green, was found wrapped in fabric in the trunk of her own car, abandoned in a Sanford parking lot, which is a detail that still hits with disrupting clarity decades later. Now, here's the article in its entirety. A jury recommended a man convicted of murder be put to death in Florida after finding him guilty of killing a woman there. 59-year-old DeMaurice Hunter was convicted of first-degree murder and theft in the death of 38-year-old Teresa Ann Green, who was found strangled to death and left in the trunk of her own car. The same jury returned days later to hear evidence in the penalty phase and unanimously recommended that Hunter be put to death. On May 26, 2002, Hunter was living in the same apartment building as the victim, and the two were both guests at a party hosted by Joyce and Joseph Butler, who also lived in the building. The two went to leave the party at the same time, and witnesses told police they both saw the victim and the defendant fall down the stairs before getting up and entering the victim's apartment. The Butlers told police that several hours after the party ended, Hunter returned to their apartment and asked Joseph Butler for a favor. Hunter allegedly gave Joseph Butler the keys to a white van and asked him to drive behind him as he drove Green's car. Joseph Butler never saw Green. Hunter parked Green's Oldsmobile at a Walgreens and then joined Joseph Butler in the white van. When Joseph Butler asked why the victim's vehicle was being left behind, Hunter said, "I did something really bad." Joseph Butler told police he then said he didn't want to hear anything else, and the topic was dropped. Police were dispatched to the Walgreens, where they found Green's car. When they looked inside, they found her body wrapped in an unknown material in the trunk. The medical examiner determined the death was a homicide caused by manual strangulation. When officers interviewed the owner of the white van, Henry Fields, he told them that Hunter had recently traveled to the area from Oakland, California. Fields said that the defendant confided in him that he had committed a murder in Oakland before coming to Orlando. The victim in that case was a longtime friend of Hunter's girlfriend, according to police. WFTV in Orlando reported that Hunter was already convicted in the Oakland murder and sentenced to 110 years before he was extradited to Florida to face charges in Green's death. Now, Hunter's defense will have a final chance at a Spencer hearing to present mitigating circumstances and evidence in, in an effort to save the defendant's life. Judge Lisa Munyon will preside over that hearing on June 1st. And ladies and gentlemen, all I can say to that is this case was ugly from the beginning, and it's all leading to that Spencer hearing. And if I was a betting man or any kind of prognosticator worth my salt, I would assume, I would bet, I would predict that Judge Munyon is going to go ahead and say is going to follow the jury's recommendation and DeMorris Hunter be put to death. But even if she doesn't follow the recommendation, he will end up serving life in prison. So either way you slice it, it would be a long time coming, but it would still be justice served. All right, so that takes care of that development story. Now it's time for the midweek Dirty Dozen countdown, and we are kicking off the countdown at number 12 with a former University of Michigan coach avoiding jail, but he gets a warning from the judge. Here's what happened before we get there. Former Michigan head coach Sharon Moore appeared for sentencing on a misdemeanor charge tied to a driving incident. The judge opted not to impose jail time, but instead issuing a probationary conditions. But the real headline here is the stern judicial warning delivered directly from the bench. Let's see what that warning sounds and possibly looks like. Whew. Okay, our countdown song, and we start off in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A former University of Michigan football coach avoided jail time on Tuesday as a judge sentenced him to probation for two misdemeanor offenses. 40-year-old Sharon Moore pleaded no contest to the charges of malicious use of a telecommunications device in the context of a domestic relationship and trespass in March. He faced up to 6 months behind bars at Tuesday's sentencing. Prosecutors had initially charged Moore with a felony for home invasion as well as stalking and illegal entry. Those charges were previously dropped. I will commend counsel on this case because I think they have both shown courage, but I particularly want to address the Washington County Prosecutor's Office in doing what is right, Judge J. Cedric Simpson said at the hearing. First off, I want to shout out Judge Simpson. I've seen some of his exploits on A&E's court cam. This, you talk about a judge that doesn't take any guff from anyone, that is your guy. Watch court. I advise you to watch court cam. You will see exactly what I mean when it comes to his cases. Judge Simpson went on to say, I watched I don't know how many hours of video in this case, and I will tell you that investigators were not only professional, they tried to get to the bottom of it, and at some points their efforts seemed thwarted. Moore's former executive assistant had reported to police that the defendant had confronted her, blamed her for his firing, and threatened to kill himself with knives in her apartment. The incident on December 10th allegedly came after the woman ended her affair with Moore, who is married, and spoke to school officials about it. Simpson revealed that While the alleged victim claimed to have told Moore to stop contacting her on December 8th, the evidence showed that wasn't possible. Call logs showed numerous calls back and forth with the alleged victim placing a call to Moore that lasted more than 11 minutes. Knowing that, prosecutors could not move forward with the stalking charge. Simpson said, in good faith, legally, morally, ethically, they could not proceed on that, he said. And they knew it. They didn't try to hide the ball. They didn't do any of that. While the alleged victim told the court that she was deeply impacted by the incident and wanted Moore to face the maximum punishment, Simpson ruled that incarceration was not appropriate in Moore's case. But his mercy came with stern words. I will send my direct warning to you, Mr. Moore, Judge Simpson said. If there should be a violation, all bets are off the table. In deciding to spare Moore from jail, Simpson credited the defendant's wife. There is a certain irony in a lot of this, and it's a big one in my opinion. The person, quite frankly, Mr. Moore, that is saving you from the full wrath of this court is the one you betrayed. Simpson said that the letter submitted to him by Kelly Moore had the greatest impact on his sentencing decision. Simpson sentenced Moore to a total of 18 months of probation, during which time he must continue mental health treatment and have had no contact with the victim. Wow. So there's why I believe this was perfect for the number one spot. The whole thing was procedural, was explosive. It's a public figure accountability story without veering into scandal mongering. And it shows a Judge J. Cedric Simpson, using this moment to reinforce responsibility and restraint. This fits right where stories need to be fit, where the system tries to correct behavior rather than sensationalize it. Now, as far as my own commentary about what could have happened that could have prevented this from even hitting the courtroom, and I need to tap into a song that goes with this. If the woman that Coach Moore was messing with wanted to end things, then in my opinion, he should have just did like the Manhattans once sung and just said, "Okay, let's just kiss and say goodbye." That would have put the cap on it. That would have been the end of it. But lo and behold, there they are in the courtroom, and Coach Moore got absolutely lucky. I won't say whether that was justice served or not, but that is absolute luck on his end, and he better be thanking his wife for turning in that letter to the judge to shake things up differently. All right, we go to number 11 now. A bride and groom avoid trial after a groomsman was killed by car during the after party. Now, here's what happened there real quick. A wedding celebration turned tragic when a groomsman was struck and killed by a car during the after party. The bride and groom, initially facing charges tied to the circumstances of the gathering, have now avoided trial altogether after prosecutors determined the evidence didn't support moving forward. The case closes for them, but the emotional communal fallout remains. Let's check this out. We are in Flint, Michigan. A couple charged with a groomsman on their wedding night avoided a trial after both changed their pleas the day before jury selection was scheduled to begin. 24-year-old James Shira pleaded no contest to an amended charge of second-degree homicide. operating a vehicle without a valid license, and leaving the scene of a crash on Tuesday. His wife, 23-year-old Savannah Collier, pleaded guilty to a single charge of accessory after the fact to a felony. On the couple's wedding day, August 30th, 2024, it took a turn after the reception when investigators say Shara intentionally ran down a groomsman with his car. Police were initially called to a reported crash that left the pedestrian injured. The victim, identified as Terry Lewis Taylor Jr., 29, was later pronounced dead. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton said when charges were filed. "I've seen people running over other people, but not so soon after a wedding." Police said the wedding itself was held at a pizzeria and the celebration continued, eventually moving to a private home. At that home, investigators said an argument began. Taylor had been standing in the street in front of the home when he was hit by an SUV at a high rate of speed, police said. Prosecutors said that after hitting the victim with the SUV, Shara left the scene and did not speak to police until the next day. Court records reviewed by Court TV showed that Shara entered a no contest plea due to a lack of memory and civil liability. He took the plea without a prior agreement on sentencing, though prosecutors agreed he should not face any sentence enhancements or consecutive sentence. Collier pleaded guilty as charged. Her defense has requested that she be sentenced pursuant to Michigan's Homes Youthful Trainee Act, or HYTA, which allows a youthful offender's case to be dismissed and sealed upon successful completion of probation. The law applies to defendants ages 17 to 24. Prosecutors objected to the HYTA considering considerations in her case. Shara's sentencing is scheduled for May 11th, Collier's for May 26th. Both will appear before Judge Carrie Hannibal for sentencing. So this is number 11, meaning that I put this at number 11 because it sits what I like to call the shadow zone of the countdown. It's deeply human, but not a grief segment. It's legally interesting, but not a courtroom centerpiece case. Not like it's a major trial. It's a procedural decision that shapes the narrative more than the incident itself. And it's also a reminder that not every tragedy equals criminal liability, which is an important editorial distinction I always honor. It's messy, yes, but it's not chaotic. Is it emotional? Yes, but not sensational. It's a story that forces you all to sit with the complexity of no trial without it turning into a spectacle. Now we're getting into our top 10 stories. And the number 10 spot, Kelsey Fitzsimmons is back in court and she is fighting for the custody of her child. And here's what we know. Former Massachusetts police officer Kelsey Fitzsimmons, coming fresh off of criminal trial, is now back in court. This time, I'm in a family law arena, seeking custody system, and of course the child's best interest, which is the only standard that truly governs these cases. This is not a criminal proceeding, but it's a parallel legal track with its own rules, its own stakes, and its own emotional gravity. Let's go to Massachusetts. Salem, Massachusetts, that is. A former police officer acquitted on charges of she threatened a fellow officer with a gun returned to court on yesterday Let me look at that date again. Yesterday with her ex-fiance. 29-year-old Kelsey Fitzsimmons had faced charges after her colleagues at the North Andover Police Department came to her home on June 30th, 2025 to serve a restraining order. Fitzsimmons testified at her trial that she was overwhelmed and depressed and wanted to take her own life. But when she pulled out a gun, another officer saw her doing so, claimed the gun was pointed at him, and opened fire, hitting her in the chest. The restraining order at the centerpiece of the case was filed on an affidavit written by Justin Alain, Fitzsimmons' then fiance. Yesterday, Fitzsimmons and Alain returned to court where they told the judge they had reached an agreement to extend the protection from abuse order that still governed the case. Under the amended order, both Fitzsimmons and Alain are permitted to contact one another and be in one another's presence, but neither is permitted to abuse the other. The judge refused to sign off on the initial amended order as proposed by both sides because it carried an automatic expiration date. The judge had both sides rewrite the agreement, so it required them to return for review before the order was dismissed. Fitzsimmons and Alain remain in a custody battle over their shared infant who is less than a year old. Prior to her acquittal, an order prevented Fitzsimmons from having any contact with her son. That has since been amended. Both Fitzsimmons and Alain are scheduled to return to court in July as part of the custody case. So in this one, there is still no resolution yet. So why did I put this at number 10? This is where it starts to show structural tension. This isn't about guilt or innocence. It'll be about fitness, safety, and parental capacity. It's a story that just began. It doesn't end today. It starts today. It's a reminder that courtroom outcomes doesn't exist in silos. One case happens to bleed in another, and it's legally significant without being the week's headline driver. Next up at the number 9 spot, Caleb Clinton's murder trial is storming ahead. The defense asked for a 4-week delay, and the judge said, move on. Here's what happened. In the murder case against former American Idol contestant Caleb Flynn, the defense asked for a 4-day delay. A 4-day delay. A small pause, but one that could have shifted the trial's rhythm. The judge wasn't having it. Not today, not in his courtroom. Instead, the judge ordered the case to proceed without interruption, keeping the schedule tight and the momentum intact. This is coming on the heels of Flynn's earlier surprise move withdrawing his own gag order motion, meaning the defense has now had 2 procedural swings in a row shut down or reversed. Let's take a look. We're in Troy, Ohio. Prosecutors were granted a brief continuance, delaying the start of a murder trial for an Ohio man accused of killing his wife. 39-year-old Caleb Flynn, charged with murder and tampering with evidence in the death of his wife, 37-year-old Ashley Flynn, who was killed in the couple's home on February 16th. He has pleaded not guilty to both charges. Caleb Flynn was indicted in March, and his case has sped towards trial ever since. After agreeing that Judge Janine Pratt could remain on the case, despite the hiring of a new staff attorney who previously worked in the Miami County District Attorney's Office. Both the defense and the prosecution agreed to proceed to trial on April 28th. On Monday, prosecutors filed a motion asking to delay the trial by just 4 days. The motion explained that the state received an expert report on April 11th and provided it to the defense the same day. But Ohio law requires all expert reports be submitted no later than 21 days before the trial. The motion notes that Kayla Flynn's defense opposed the 4-day delay. Interesting. At a hearing on the issue, prosecutors said that the brief continuance still fell within the speedy trial guidelines and would not prejudice the defendant. Kayla Flynn's attorney argued that the state selected both the arrest date of the defendant and the trial date with full knowledge of the expert report deadline. After hearing the arguments, Pratt granted the delay. No new trial date was made publicly available immediately. The only other motion filed in the case was a motion for a non-dissemination order, which was abruptly withdrawn by the defense at the hearing scheduled to argue the issue. Caleb Flynn faces a potential life sentence if he's convicted of killing his wife, who was shot in their home. Detectives say he shot the victim with a 9mm handgun and then attempted to stage the scene. Caleb Flynn told 911 operators that his wife had been shot during a home invasion. So, now that's two procedural swings in a row that either that went against the defense or just shut down. I landed this thing at number 9 because this is where it enters the structural cracks tier. Stories where the system itself is under pressure. How so? This is a high-profile murder case. The defense team, although they asked for a speedy trial, is trying to slow the pace down some. The judge is insisting on discipline and continuity, and this trial is still accelerating despite attempts to tap the brakes. This is not the most explosive story of the week, but it's the first one where you can feel the legal machinery grinding forward, no matter who's uncomfortable. In the number 8 spot, we got a cold case here. A woman has been arrested for murder after DNA links her to a newborn found dead on a college campus 45 years ago. 45 years ago. Now that's a cold case in every sense of the word. Here's what happened. Investigators have arrested a woman after modern DNA analysis linked her to a newborn found dead on a college campus 45 years ago. For decades, the case sat unsolved, a file with no name, no mother, and no answers. But with the rise of forensic genealogy and improved DNA extraction techniques, detectives were finally able to identify the infant's biological mother, reconstruct the likely circumstances surrounding the birth, and present evidence sufficient for prosecutors to file murder charges. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of case where science becomes the witness time could never provide. This goes all the way back to 1981. Here's what you need to know. 65-year-old Nancy Jean Trottier has been charged with murder after DNA linked her to a newborn found dead in North Dakota in 1981, according to police. Advances in DNA technology reopened the cold case, leading to the baby's exhumation and a genetic genealogy report. Trottier's preliminary hearing and arraignment have been scheduled for May 21st, according to jail records reviewed by People magazine. Here's the entire article. A woman has been arrested 45 years after her newborn baby was found dead on a college campus in North Dakota, according to court records reviewed by People magazine. Those online jail records show that the Barnes County State's Attorney's Office filed a Class AA felony murder charge against 65-year-old Nancy Jean Trottier on Tuesday, April 7th. Trottier is accused of murdering a newborn baby who was found behind the Valley City State University campus, where she was a student from 1978 to 1982. In April of 1981, with a plastic bag over her face and the umbilical cord still attached, according to an affidavit of probable cause reviewed by People magazine. Autopsy found the infant, who was dubbed Rebecca by authorities, had been alive at birth and died from acute asphyxia consistent with suffocation. David. Here's Nancy Jean Trottier for you guys following along. After this case went cold for decades, advances in DNA technology led to the being reopened and the baby's body being exhumed in July 2019, according to the affidavit. Once DNA was extracted from her remains and the baby was reburied, investigators received a genetic genealogy report pointing to possible relatives of the newborn in August of 2020, which investigators say ultimately led to Trottier. Trottier was interviewed in 2021 and allegedly told investigators, "Maybe it was me," and "It could be, maybe it was me," the affidavit alleges. Trottier agreed to provide a DNA sample, and her husband's DNA was collected in December 2021. A DNA analysis returned in June 2023 and concluded that it is 3.481 quadrillion times more likely that the baby is the biological child of Trottier and her husband than an unrelated individual, according to the affidavit. The forensic report also indicated that Trottier's DNA matched that of tissue paper recovered from the scene. Again, that's according to the affidavit. Jail records reviewed by People magazine show that Trottier, who is from Arizona, is being held at the Stutsman County Correctional Center. Trottier appeared in court on Monday, April 13th. During the hearing, her attorney, Luke Heck, disputed Barnes County State's Attorney Tanya Duffy's claim that the case against her is strong, Inforum reported. A preliminary hearing and Trottier's arraignment have been scheduled for May 21st in Barnes County, according to online court records. Of course, People has reached out to the Barnes County State's Attorney's a comment. They did not receive a response back before printing this information. Again, this is one of those cases where science becomes the witness that time could never. And I have this at number 8 as this is the first true cold case ignition point in the countdown. Here's why. It's historically significant. It's emotionally heavy without requiring grief or tone coverage. It's a procedural breakthrough, but not a sensational one. And it shows the justice system reaching backward to correct what was missed forward. We'll see how that plays out as this case is being put together for court, and we'll see exactly how Trottier will plead in that case. Our number 7 story is a daycare worker in North Carolina being charged with felony child abuse after investigators say a child's leg was broken while the worker was placing them into the familiar crisscross applesauce seated position. The key elements emerging from this particular case is that the injury was severe enough to require immediate medical attention. The daycare's internal report conflicted with the child's injuries, prompting further investigation. Law enforcement determined the force used was consistent with normal handling, and the worker is now facing criminal charges, and the daycare's practices are now under scrutiny. Well, looks like it's time for me to head back to North Carolina. Ashley Nicole Torres, age 24, is charged with felony child abuse after allegedly fracturing a young boy's leg at a Raleigh daycare, according to court records. The injury occurred as the child was pulled into a crisscross applesauce position on August 22nd, 2025, according to the warrant. State regulators later disqualified Terrace from providing child care, according to the complaint obtained by People magazine. Now let's get here's the entire article. A North Carolina daycare teacher is accused of breaking a young child's leg while pulling him into a seated position at a Raleigh daycare center. 24-year-old Ashley Nicole Terrace, a former KinderCare employee, is charged with felony child abuse inflicting serious bodily injury, according to a warrant reviewed by People magazine. The child told investigators the injury happened as he was pulled into a crisscross applesauce position, resulting in a fracture to his lower leg during an October 22nd, 2025 incident at a KinderCare location on Mitchell Mill Road in Raleigh, according to that warrant. Medical findings showed a spinal fracture of the tibia consistent with what he described according to news outlets WRAL and CBS 17. Shout out to both of those stations. Now, I'm gonna before I continue the argument, I am going to do a bit of digging myself on this position. Yes. Yeah. Give me just a moment, guys. This information up before continuing on with the. All right. Okay. Crisscross applesauce. I should have known this. It's a common playful term for sitting on the floor with sauce. It's often called Taylor style or formerly Indian style. It involves sitting down with knees bent wide apart and your lower legs crossed in front, often with your hand in your lap for stability. Let's see if I can grab it and continue with the article. All right. It's commonly used in preschool and elementary schools for circle time, story time, or to encourage a focused palm posture. It helps develop core stability and proper postural control when sitting. The alternatives, sometimes used as a better, more stable alternative to W sitting, whatever that is. And while popular, it can be challenging or uncomfortable for some children to hold for long periods. So there we go. That's what we know about the crisscross applesauce position. Moving onward, Terrace was later disqualified from providing child care by state regulators in November 2025, and that's according to a complaint filed in Wake County Court and obtained by People magazine. KinderCare said in a statement that Terrace is no longer employed by the company and has not worked at the center since October 2025. Again, that's according to WRAL, ABC 11 in Durham, and the Raleigh News and Observer. Shout out to ABC 11 and the News Observer. At care, the safety and well-being of the children in our care is always our top priority, according to the spokesperson, adding that the child's family and appropriate agencies were notified following the incident. The company says she was briefly allowed to continue teaching under a safety plan before state licensing officials later directed that she be removed from the classroom while the investigation continued. Now, I am gonna finish this off while why I selected this for the seventh story. First off, just to let you know, this is not a mistake story. This is a duty of care breach inside a setting where safety is non-negotiable. I put this at the number 7 spot of this Dirty Dozen because it involves a child. This is the emotional stakes. It exposes institutional vulnerability that raises structural stakes. It's legally significant without being the week's heaviest case, and we still got time for that. And it signals that the countdown is now dealing with direct harm, not just procedural tension. So there we go with that in the number 7 spot. And now I come to you with, if I can find it, this for this PSA. This is definitely needed here. Okay. This is another one of those cases where I come to you saying that your child is our responsibility to protect, even in cases like this. Our children do not have to be victims of child abuse. We can do something about this. If you suspect child abuse, you are urged to call the National Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453, or you can go to www.childhelp.org. All calls are toll-free and confidential. This hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with people on the line willing to help in more than 170 languages. Our children depend on us for their protection. We're depending on them to carry us into the future. But we can't do that abusing them. We can't do that with them being victims of abuse. That organization again is the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. Number again is 1-800-4-A-CHILD, 422-4453, and the address once again is www.childhelp.org. This is for our children. Let's do everything we can to protect them. Let's continue the countdown, and we're going to number 6. And we have a conviction convicted killer apologizing for her sister's death. She said during sentencing that I will miss her for my life. Mm-hmm. Here's what happened there. During sentencing, a woman convicted of killing her own sister delivered an emotional apology, a statement that acknowledged the loss, the guilt, and the lifelong consequences of her actions. Her words were simple, direct, and heavy. I will miss her for the rest of my life. The court heard her. The family heard her. But the sentence still had to reflect the crime, not the remorse. Let's check that out. We are now in Cape May, New Jersey. A victim's family denounced a plea agreement as a travesty of justice, as a woman was sentenced to just 8 years in prison for killing her sister. 37-year-old Sarah Erickson pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of first-degree aggravated manslaughter in the death of her half-sister, Emily Crudis. Erickson was charged alongside Crudis' fiancé, Joseph Regan. Regan pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of drug-induced death and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, followed by a 5-year term of supervision. He had agreed to testify against Erickson before she had gone to trial. Erickson addressed the court at her sentencing on Monday, offering an apology for her role. First and foremost, I want to apologize from the bottom of my heart to Emily's family, she said. I know what happened is heartbreaking and is something I can't fix and never should have happened. I take full responsibility for my actions while getting high. I wish every day that I could go back and change it. I did and still do love my sister and will miss her the rest of my life. Crudis' aunt, Barbara Merrifield, delivered a scathing victim impact statement. How in the heck could you inject your sister with fentanyl, knowing that stuff kills people? How could you do that to your little sister, she asked. If I would have gotten my way, Your Honor, I would never ever let this woman be released from jail, because that still wouldn't be enough time for what has been done to Emily. In my eyes, it was premeditated and greed. Investigators said that Crudis had just returned home after treatment for a suicide attempt on February 16, 2023, when Erickson and Regan dosed her with Xanax and then injected her with fentanyl and heroin in a syringe, according to a report from WPVI. Shout out to them. Emily, in her last moments, knew she was going to die, and knew she was going to die at the hands of her own sister and her own fiancé, the victim's uncle, Rich Crudis Jr., said at Monday's sentencing hearing. With zero remorse, they went back to partying and to watching Emily struggle to breathe and then finally take her last breath. He further described the plea agreement given to Erickson as a travesty of justice. This is a family tragedy played out in a public forum, prosecutor Edward Shim said in response to the family's protests. Facts sometimes dictate resolutions. I respect the family's opinion. I understand it. I don't know that I would feel any different. Judge Jeffrey Waldman acknowledged the family's feelings, but ultimately handed down the agreed upon sentence of 8 years. Today is a solemn and difficult day, Waldman said. No words from me will ever restore what has been taken from you. And those words I can actually agree with. There's nothing the judge could have said that could nothing the judge could have said that could replace the life that was taken from that family. This is the perfect midpoint of what I like to call the volatility zone. This lands at number 6 because this story was deeply personal, but it's never it's not sensational. It's emotionally charged, but it's not chaotic. It's a moment where the defendant's humanity surfaces, but the harm remains undeniable. It's a story that forces you to sit with the tension between remorse and responsibility. In my opinion, I side with the family that 8 years. It might have been the agreed upon sentence, but deep down in my heart of hearts, I have to say definitely that is nowhere near justice served. And I can say the same thing for Joseph Regan, that 5 years for his role. I don't think so. Okay, guys, we're now in the home stretch of this Dirty Dozen. We're in the top 5 right now. At number 5, Tanner Horner is confessing to Athena Strand's murder in Jailhouse Letters. In newly released Jailhouse Letters, Tanner Horner, the FedEx driver accused of abducting and killing 7 Athena Strand, confessed in his own handwriting to the crime. These letters reportedly include direct admissions of responsibility, descriptions of his emotional state, statements that prosecutors will certainly use to establish intent, and a tone that oscillates force and rationalization. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a leak. This is not speculation. This is a defendant putting himself on paper. Let's go to Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. Jurors tasked with deciding whether Tanner Horner should live or die were shown letters the defendant allegedly wrote to the victim's family, in which he appears to confess. The 35-year-old Horner pleaded guilty to kidnapping and capital murder in the death of 7-year-old Athena Strand, just as his trial was scheduled to begin. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, so the same jury that would have decided his guilt is now tasked with deciding whether he should receive a death sentence or life in prison. Horner was working for a third-party contractor to deliver packages for FedEx when he abducted Strand from her family's home. After days of searching, the child's body was found in the water at Bobo's Crossing. Sergeant Brett Yarrow testified on Monday morning about handwritten notes found during a search of Horner's cell after his arrest. One of those letters was addressed to Strand's family. In it, it said, "To Athena's family, I wanted to start by saying how sorry I am about Athena. I can't hold it in any longer. I've done a terrible thing to your family, and I'm sorry. I can't tell you how many countless nights I've stayed awake, unable to sleep. I pray for you, for all of you." The letter does not offer details about Strand's death. Instead, Horner says, and I'm quoting, "I owe it to you all to explain where my mind is at. Let me start by saying I have Asperger's syndrome. In other words, I am on the autism spectrum. I don't do well with change or things that are unpredictable in nature. When I first started out as a driver at FedEx, I was given a singular route, and that route wouldn't change for a while. After a bit, my employer started making random changes to my route, adding stuff from other routes so they could make more money. I don't do well with change. Again, I can have meltdowns when unexpected changes to my daily route happen." In the letter, Horner wrote that changes to his schedule ultimately led to a breakdown. I'm sorry I allowed my mental state to be unstable. I'm sorry I took your little angel away from you. You didn't deserve it. You all didn't deserve it. My son didn't deserve to lose his father. My mother didn't deserve to lose her son. My fiancée didn't deserve to have her wedding day stripped from her. I pray that my death eases your suffering in some way. The only thing I ask for forgiveness and for you to remember my son and show him some grace and mercy, for he no longer has his father. A second piece of paper, labeled Side Notes, references a civil suit filed by the Strand family against FedEx in the wake of Athena's killing. I hope this letter both helps ease your suffering and helps you with your case against FedEx, Horner wrote under notes claiming that the shipping company is negligent when it comes to safety. Investigators say they found a second letter in Horner's cell that was labeled Detectives Only. In that letter, Horner claims he is in danger and describes another man who he says was involved in Strand's killing. When I pulled up to the house, an older man had pulled a rifle on me and demanded my wallet. It's weird. He almost expected me to be there. After he checked my wallet, he gave me instructions after handing me my wallet back. He told me to take the girl and bring her to a specific spot, the letter said. He gave me a change of clothes for the girl and told me to have her changed into them before handing her over to him. He had threatened my family, and I didn't know what to do, so I went along with it. Don't tell the media, by the way. IDK, which stands for I don't know, if he's going to do something. If I'm killed on the way to or from the courthouse, I'll assume it was him. Investigators said there was no evidence of any other suspect being involved in Strand's death. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Jessica Dwyer testified to Strand's autopsy on Monday morning. She said she determined the child's cause of death was blunt force injuries with smothering and strangulation. Her case notes included a reference to a patterned zigzag, tread-like pattern abrasions, and abraded contusions across Strand's face. In an interview with police previously shown to the jury, Horner said that he tried to break Strand's neck but was unable to. He said he ultimately used two hands to strangle her before disposing of her body. Dwyer testified that every part of Strand's body except for her right arm suffered injuries. So he's admitting what he's done, and he's even in this, he's asking for death. This is wild for all the craziest reasons. This is where this countdown is entering the upper tier. These are the stories that define the week's emotional and legal landscape. This is a major development in a nationally followed case. It's a confession. This confession strengthens the state's position. It's a window into the defendant's mindset. It's heavy, but it's not the heaviest story of the week. It's emotionally charged, but it's not the peak of the emotions. This one is still ongoing, and we'll see exactly where this will lead and what the jury will decide as far as Tanner Horner's punishment. Next up, another cold case has seen some progression. 16-year-old stepbrother in for murder and sexual abuse of Anna Kepner. Here's what we know. a grand jury, a 16-year-old boy, the stepbrother of Anna Kepner, on charges of murder, sexual abuse, and additional related offenses tied to the circumstances of her death. The indictment marks the first major procedural leap in a case that has been under intense investigation and community scrutiny. Prosecutors now have the authority to move forward with a full criminal case, and the court will determine whether he will be tried as a juvenile or an adult. That decision will shape the entire trajectory of the proceedings. So here we go with number 4 on the list. We're in Miami, Florida. A 16-year-old has been indicted as an adult on federal charges in the death of his 18-year-old stepsister, who was found dead on a cruise ship during a family vacation. The 16-year-old, identified only as TH in court records, was indicted on charges of first-degree murder and aggravated sexual abuse in the death of Anna Kepner. WSVN's cameras previously captured TH outside the federal courthouse in Miami on February 6th. TH was initially charged on February 2nd as a juvenile. In court records, which remained sealed to the public, investigators said that TH sexually assaulted and intentionally killed Kepner while the ship was in international waters. U.S. Attorney Jason A. Redding-Quinones said the following in a statement: "Our hearts go out to the victim's family during this unimaginable loss." Immediately after announcing the indictment, federal prosecutors filed a motion seeking to revoke bond for TH. Immediately after the ship docked, TH was removed from the family's home and sent to live with a maternal uncle. At a previous hearing in family court, TH's mother, Chantel Kepner, revealed her son was no longer welcome at the home she shares with her husband, Kepner's father. In filings, TH's father has pledged to support his son. The new prosecution filings referred to a previous hearing held on February 6, 2026, where the government requested TH to be held without bond. Magistrate Judge Torres found there was probable cause for the charges, but declined to grant the request for detention at that time. The evidence presented at the JDA detention hearing lays bare there is clear and convincing evidence that the defendant is a danger to others under the standards set forth in the Bail Reform Act. That evidence demonstrated the offense involved in the most involutive crime one person can inflict upon another. He committed these crimes against a victim with whom he had no apparent relational strife and whom he was being raised to view as a sibling. The medical examiner determined that Kepner died from mechanical asphyxiation. Investigators previously said in court documents that the teenager's body was found under the bed in the room where she had been staying on the ship. Kepner, TH, and their parents were on a Carnival Cruise Line's Horizon ship in November for a family vacation. Kepner and TH were sharing a room with Kepner's biological 14-year-old brother. The teen's parents, who had recently married, were staying in a room across the hall with their 9-year-old daughters. One floor above, Kepner's grandparents had their own room. As of right now, no new court dates were immediately scheduled in that case. But like I said, is already moving forward. We're in the threshold of the heavy hitters tier. This is one of the stories that define the week's legal and emotional landscape. This one is at number 4 because it's a major development in a deeply disturbing case. It's involving the serious, violent, and sexual offense charges. It centers on two minors. Well, one minor and one nearing an adult. It's a case that has finally moved from investigation to formal action. And yes, like I said, it's heavy, but it's not the most defining story of the week. We're getting closer and closer to that. Next, this one is already underway. Utah versus Tracy Grist, the family trap murder trial. While I'm pulling that case up, like I said, this one is already underway. The case prosecutors have is now officially underway in a Utah courtroom, with defendant Tracy Grist standing for the murder at the center of a tangled, emotionally charged family dynamic. The key elements during the early phase of the trial is the opening statements having framed two competing realities: one, calculated violence; the other, of a chaotic, misunderstood confrontation. Witnesses are beginning to establish the timeline, the relationships, and the alleged motive. Forensic evidence is expected to play a major role, especially in reconstructing the physical struggle. Family members are positioned on both sides of the courtroom, underscoring the emotional fracture that gives the trial its name, the family trap. This is not just a murder case. It's a case about family conflict turned fatal. And now the courtroom is the only place where the truth can be sorted from the wreckage. We're in Provo, Utah, where a Utah woman is standing trial on charges she masterminded a plot to kill her son-in-law, who was shot to death in her home. 60-year-old Tracy Grist is charged with murder, criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and domestic violence in the presence of a child in the death of 42-year-old Matthew Rastelli. Matthew Rastelli was shot to death in Grist's home at the hands of Grist's son, Kevin Ellis. Grist has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Matthew Rastelli's wife, Catherine, who is Grist's daughter and Ellis's sister, pleaded guilty shortly after her arrest to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and discharge of a firearm. She was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison and testified at Ellis's murder trial. She is expected to make another appearance to testify at her mother's trial. And that testimony I'm gonna bring to you before I go further with the countdown. Prosecutors said that Matthew Rastelli was lured to his death, believing he was arriving at Grist's home to pick up his wife and two children and return with them to their home in California. But Catherine Rastelli has testified that she had no intention of leaving and instead worked with her mother and brother to kill the victim. Ellis told police that he had shot his brother-in-law in self-defense and pointed the police officers on the scene to a knife in Matthew Rastelli's hand. But investigators determined that the knife was in his non-dominant hand, and the knife in question had been purchased online, allegedly by the defendant. At Ellis's sentencing, prosecutors said they considered Grist to be the ringleader of the plot and have pointed to digital evidence they say ties the matriarch to Rastelli's killing. Among that evidence was Grist's search history, which included searches for Catherine Magbanua, a key player in the murder of FSU professor Dan Markell. Markell, as you remember, was killed in a murder for hire. 5 people have been sentenced for his death, including his former mother-in-law, Donna Adelson, and former brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson. Where was Donna Adelson arrested, as well as a search for a Dateline episode focusing on the Adelson's family, also appeared on Grist's devices. Grist also allegedly searched for how to get my U.S. passport fast and for the "It's Happening" meme. Yep. This is definitely one of those cases that we may see a lot of similarities to of the eight. And I am looking for. Yes, this is what I was looking for. Catherine Rostelli, her husband's murder started as a joke. Just give me one moment, guys. All right, good. Pleaded guilty to plotting her husband's murder, took the stand to testify against her mother, who prosecutors say was the mastermind behind the killing. 38-year-old Catherine Roselli was called as the first witness in her mother's trial. Her mother, 60-year-old Tracy Grist, has pleaded not guilty to multiple charges, including murder and criminal conspiracy in the death of Catherine's husband, 42-year-old Matthew Roselli. Matthew Roselli was shot and killed moments after walking into Grist's home by Grist's son and Catherine Roselli's brother, Kevin Ellis. Catherine Roselli previously testified at Ellis's trial as part of her plea agreement. Catherine testified that her marriage had been sliding downhill and by early 2024 was texting her mother frequently to say that she was miserable. "I hate my life, Mom," she wrote in one text. "I hate that I have kids with Matt." Grist allegedly encouraged her daughter to leave the victim, going so far as to fund the rental of a storage unit and a rental car in a plot to allow Catherine Roselli to escape her marriage. After leaving Matthew Roselli at their home in California, Catherine Roselli took her kids to her mother's home in Utah. She testified that's where the plotting began. "We were trying to figure out how to get out of this marriage," Catherine Roselli said. "I was fearful that I was going to lose my children." After about a week of being with her mother, Catherine Roselli said the idea of killing her husband came up. Grist said it like a joke. "We can get him to come out here and we could just murder him and make it look like self-defense. So we originally started more as a joke than a solid plan," she explained from the witness stand. As the planning continued, Catherine Roselli testified that she began to have second thoughts about the plan. "I had moments where I was thinking that I was going to regret taking someone else's life. I looked Grist in the eyes and said, 'Mom, I don't want to do this anymore.' She looked me in the eyes and said, 'I don't care. I'm doing it anyway.'" Catherine Roselli said that her mother was the true mastermind behind the plot to kill and made the decision to recruit Ellis. She said, "Kevin's feeling suicidal. She told him that she was going to do it, go off Matt first, and then he can finish himself off." Catherine Roselli described the steps she and her mother took to prepare for Matthew Roselli's arrival at the home, even going so far as to cover the furniture with blankets to help with blood splatter. She was upstairs with the two young children she shared with her husband when the shots rang out. "I heard gunshots. I heard Matt say, 'Ow, ow.'" Catherine Roselli said she began to cry on the witness stand. "Then I heard my mom and brother talking about putting the knife in his hand, telling Kevin telling my mom to be careful because he could still be alive. Coming down the stairs, she saw the victim's body on the ground. That moment was very traumatizing. I remember when I saw it, I wanted to fall to the ground screaming." Grist's defense said their client is innocent and that Ellis was solely responsible for Matthew Roselli's death. During cross-examination, Grist's attorney emphasized Catherine Ellis's chronic marijuana use, suggesting it clouded her memory. He also detailed Catherine Roselli's arrangement with prosecutors, which allowed her to be sentenced to 1 to 15 years in exchange for her truthful testimony. So, given that testimony at the beginning of this trial, this is why why this is why I like to call the first of the three heavy hitters. It's at number 3 because this is a full trial, not a pre-trial moment. It involves family-based violence, which also carries layered emotional and legal complexity. This is unfolding in real time, giving it the immediacy. It's gripping, but it's still not the most explosive or consequential story of the week. It has the narrative to be a top-tier case without overshadowing the top 2 spots. Speaking of those top 2 spots, coming up, this one, this next case is pretty much done. A murder trial has been canceled after a teen pleads guilty during jury selection. This was the Tiger Bay teenager murder trial that was canceled. We're in Gainesville, Florida. First off, here's what happened. A teen defendant facing a full murder trial stunned the courtroom by pleading guilty right in the middle of jury selection. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't expected. It wasn't even part of the morning's plan. The judge missed the nearly seated jury. The trial calendar evaporated, just like that. Instantly, from trial strategy to sentencing preparation is how the case pivoted. Here's the key elements. The plea was entered after potential jurors had already been questioned. Prosecutors accepted the plea, ending the need for a full trial. The judge immediately shifted the case into the sentencing phase, and families on both sides were forced to process a sudden, irreversible turn. This is the kind of moment that reminds everyone trials doesn't always end with verdicts. Sometimes they end with decisions. Here's what we know. The murder trial of a teenager was canceled on Monday when she pleaded guilty as jury selection was just beginning. Kamari Narda Lee Hill, now age 15, faced a slew of charges including first-degree murder and robbery with a firearm in the death of 24-year-old Wilmer Alberto Perez, who was killed on April 19, 2024, at the Tiger Bay apartment complex. At the time of Perez's killing, Hill was just 13 years of age. On Monday, Hill pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter as well as conspiracy to commit robbery and robbery. She was immediately sentenced to 20 years on each of those charges. She also pleaded guilty to firing a weapon into the building and was sentenced to 15 years. All sentences will be served concurrently, and upon her release, she will be subjected to 10 years probation. In filings reviewed by Court TV, investigators said that Hill was with co-defendant Zion James, who was 14 at the time, when the two made arrangements to meet with Perez to purchase marijuana. James pretended to pay, then grabbed the drugs and took off running. Prosecutors said that's when Hill pulled out a gun and killed the victim. James previously pleaded no contest to several charges, including robbery with a firearm, tampering with physical evidence, and delivery of cannabis in 2025. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, followed by 2 years of community control and 8 years probation. James was expected to testify against Hill. Evidence against Hill included messages she allegedly sent a witness in the minutes after Perez's death, asking them to unlock the door and just take the gun. That's according to the Alachua Chronicle. Hill has previous convictions dating back to 2023 and 2024. Here's why it lands in the runner-up spot in the Dirty Dozen. It's a major legal development. A shock pivot in the murder case. It's emotionally charged, but it's not at that peak yet. It's procedurally dramatic without being the week's defining story. This one actually has all the evidence of a number one, But the number one story that I'm bringing this evening, it's bigger than that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the top of the Dirty Dozen in this countdown, and this one is a procedural maneuver, a potential procedural maneuver. A former paramedic accused of killing his wife with eye drops wants his trial moved. A former paramedic accused of murdering his wife using tetrahydrozoline-based eye drops has now filed a motion for a change of venue, arguing that the pre-trial publicity and community sentiment seat an impartial jury where the case is currently filed. The case comes after a high-profile indictment, a wave of public attention due to the unusual alleged method of poisoning, local media coverage that the defense claims has contaminated the jury pool, and a prosecution preparing a case built heavily on forensic toxicology and medical knowledge. A judge must now decide whether the trial stays put or move to a new county entirely. Now, before I go into the article itself, this is why this is my number one. It's the defining story of the week because it's a major strategic pivot in a murder case. It signals the defense believes the current venue is unwinnable. It raises questions about fairness, publicity, and community bias. It's a case where it's a case where with a rare alleged method of homicide which naturally draws attention, and it's the kind of motion that can reshape the entire trial. Jury composition, the timeline, the tone, everything. Here's what we got. We're in Gastonia, North Carolina, where a former paramedic accused of killing his wife with eye drops, setting fire to a medical helicopter, and faking a kidnapping and assault is now asking a judge to move his trial. 41-year-old Joshua Lee Hunsucker is charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obtaining property in the death of his wife, 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker. He is separately charged with allegedly setting fire to a helicopter while he was on board in an attempt to distract from the charges. Joshua Hunsucker is also charged with witness intimidation for allegedly stalking Stacy Hunsucker's parents, falsely accusing them of assault, and allegedly attempting to poison his own child with eye drops. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. In a new filing this week, his indictment for his wife's alleged murder, Joshua Hunsucker has asked for a judge to move his trial out of Gaston County, where he says he will not be able to have a fair trial. Hunsucker's previous request for the trial to be moved, made in December 2021, was denied. Now Hunsucker's defense says the circumstances have changed, requiring a change of venue. The motion points to increased media attention, including a major exclusive by People magazine and a scholarly analytical feature which framed the defendant within a national pattern of spousal abusers in February 2026. The motion also points to a story published by Court TV noting that news of the superseding indictment in the case was published within days of its filing. The coverage has been continuous, inflammatory, and deeply prejudicial for over 6 years. Attorneys said in the filing, the motion acknowledges that a gag order has been issued in the case, but says the order has not restrained the voluminous media, podcast, and social media coverage of this case. It concludes by saying the gag order has been wholly ineffective as a remedy for jury pool contamination. Venue transfer is the appropriate remedy. The motion concedes that a change in venue may be denied if the coverage is factual and non-inflammatory, but Hunsucker's attorneys maintain the coverage in his case has been the opposite, noting that at least 2 separate public Facebook video posts have labeled the defendant the Eye Drop Killer, a guilt presupposing nickname that has entered community discourse. If the court refuses to grant the motion to move the trial out of Gaston County, the motion requests that a special veneer of jurors is brought in from outside the Charlotte-Gastonia television market. That includes not only Gaston County, where Joshua Hunsucker is charged, but the entire area that receives broadcasts from Charlotte-based stations WCNC, WSOC, and WBTV. No hearing has been scheduled on the request. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how we wrap up the countdown, the Dirty Dozen countdown for this midweek. 12 stories, one messy countdown. And if there's anything this countdown proves, is that the justice system never moves in a straight line. It twists, it turns, it surprises. And Bethea'S Byte Reloaded will be right here tracking every step of it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your midweek bite. The facts, the updates, and the cases shaping the week so far. We stay drama-free, we stay fact-driven, and we stay focused on what matters. Thank you for spending part of your Wednesday night with me, and I look forward to doing this again. I'm Ernest Bethea, the last outlaw. And you already know where you are, right? This is Bethea'S Byte, and it's reloaded. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining me here at the drama-free true crime destination. Please be sure to follow Bethea'S Byte Reloaded all over social media and support the channel through PayPal and Cash App. You can get your true crime news right here with no gimmicks, no drama, and no BS. This is Bethea'S Byte, and it's reloaded.